Hi guys.
We're going to talk about Eeyore today.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the melancholic temperament. So Matt said Eeyore because we keep relating these to Winnie the Pooh characters, even though those are in the raw state of the temperaments. But we're really excited to share this one with you. There's some tremendous inclinations for the melancholic. And so we can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff. So for the melancholic personality, you really get in touch with the dark side, the light side. We're going to be going through these things, some practical tips for growing in virtue in the melancholic temperament, or helping somebody else grow in the virtue in their melancholic temperament, but also using our journal as well. So we're excited. We'll see you in there. Part 4 of a 5-part series.
Yes.
Welcome back to the Catholic Coaching Podcast.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the temperaments today, specifically the temperament of melancholic.
Melancholic. So don't be sad, folks, all you melancholics out there.
Yeah.
It's my dad joke. This is going to be fun for all the sanguines out there. All the sanguines are like, can we just go back to learning about the fun stuff?
Well, there are some fun things about a melancholic. They are incredibly deep. So we'll get into that. But the first thing, just to kind of brief you guys, if you have not watched our 3 previous, or listened to, if you're watching on YouTube, which, by the way, if you are listening to our podcast, go subscribe to our channel on YouTube and watch us there. If you like seeing people like I do, I prefer YouTube over a podcast.
It's fun interactions. We make funny faces from time to time.
Very expressive.
Yes.
I roll my eyes at Matt a lot, so that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Definitely watch.
There's quite a few micro expressions that show up that I wish we can just go delete it, but there they are. We're going to be real on this.
Yes. But if you have not listened to our previous 3 podcasts, we're talking about the temperaments, the 4 temperaments, one of the oldest personality tests out there. A lot of people go back and forth. Is it a personality test? Is it not? But the classical Catholic traditional way of explaining the temperaments are the material dispositions of a person's body, actually. So it's a material part.
Nature versus nurture.
Yes. I don't even like putting those 2 versus one another, but there is certainly a distinction. But we believe that grace builds upon nature. So we have to know what we're working with first. We have to know what the material is. If you're a sculptor, you want to know what type of stone you're working with. See what has more give, what doesn't, what are the things that you can do with this particular type of stone. Same way is how we would describe the temperaments and how they work within us. So they're a great place of self-awareness, great starting point. They are certainly not your end point. I loathe it when people use their temperaments, myself included, when people use their temperaments as excuses to
or
not
labels.
Do things.
Yeah. This is me. This is just me.
And that's what we don't want to do. That we want to have this be our starting place. Kind of like, when you're in the mall and it's like you are here, that little arrow.
For those of you that keep going to malls. Still go to malls.
Who still go to malls.
What's a mall?
I don't know. The National Mall?
Anyways.
So that is kind of where we're starting here. So
yeah.
We're going to be talking about melancholic today.
Yeah, and I love this too, again, with the temperaments. When Aaron said, kind of like the sculptor working with the stone, when you know what kind of material you have, when you know what your temperaments are, you can start to choose to conform your life to the best use of that material. Because some materials, they have a different function to them. In the same way, our temperaments, we're going to go into the kind of the light side of these things, which is where there's some natural giftedness of them. When we can start to conform our life through our will, through our choices, to some of those natural dispositions that come with our temperaments, you start to enter into a little bit more of those places of flow, those places of just kind of ease, where you're not forcing something. It's just easy when you're kind of going with them. Now, it doesn't mean that these things don't need to be tempered and grown virtue. There's some vicious inclinations that go along with that dark side we call them. We're going to get into those today as well. But those mature temperaments really can be brought to the church as a great gift. And so understanding what the temperament is wrapped up in understanding what your gift is to the church, to the world, to your friends and family and loved ones.
And another thing that we're actually going to be rolling out, live, we haven't rolled it out yet, but if you're listening to this in time, hopefully we've rolled it out.
It'll be rolled out by this.
Is our
scheduled
temperament/charisms quiz. So what we like about this too is, you guys, there's so many free temperaments and charisms quiz, but I don't think there's one where they combine the two out there. But also, because we're a coaching company, what we want to do is not just give you information, we want to give you application. We want to give you ways to utilize your strengths and lean into your strengths and avoid those common pitfalls that maybe your temperament has. And so when you actually work on that material disposition, that nature of who you are, you can open up to those charisms that God has given to you to grow the church and to grow in grace, the life of grace, better. You can do that better. So
yeah, one of the things I just love about getting this information, I'm more excited for me as the coach to have this information in front of me when I'm coaching somebody, their temperaments and their charisms, because it gives me an insight of a starting point and also where God's grace is working with them, or God has predestined his grace to work in that person. And so it starts to kind of narrow down the scope of options that are going to lead to a thriving life for them. But not to this point where it's just like, it's something where there's just going to be a universal principle for every person that is a choleric that has a teaching charism.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some overlap, but everybody is so different in how they show up. But there are going to be some similarities there as well. And I'm excited to kind of identify what some of those universals are and how, but also just completely honoring just the individuality as well.
Yeah.
And how people show up in this combination.
Certainly as a coach, it would be a tremendous guide.
So empowering.
Into, a coaching call.
For a coach, for a pastor, I want to find a way to also get this test in the hands of like churches so they can just do like a mass kind of survey of their people in their parish. Because imagine that, imagine being a pastor, imagine being a minister, or somebody that's in ministry and knowing, like having a database of all of the charisms and temperaments of the people that are there. And you can start to really understand, like, who are going to be the people that are best fit for certain positions, right?
Yes. Do not hire me. Yeah. Don't hire me to be an administrator. I'm just not.
Yeah. Throw Clifton Strengths in there on top of it too. And you've got like an amazing thing.
Yes.
I'm done talking, Aaron.
Yes. Okay. Let's get into melancholic. Okay. So basically the distinction between the four temperaments is this is the most basic distinction, is their reaction to certain stimuli, and their duration. So like the level of reaction, the quickness of the reaction, and then the duration of the reaction to stimuli. So let's just, for example, say that there's like an upsetting stimuli that happens. For the melancholic, they're slow to react. They kind of take in information, watch things, so they don't quickly react like the choleric and the sanguine that we covered in the last two podcasts. Those two are very quick to react. The melancholic is slow to react, but with an intense reaction growing over time. So it's kind of like they are gaining intel, and then they're like, wait a second, this person keeps saying these things to me, or keeps saying these negative things to me. And then the reaction lasts for a very long time. So they can kind of hold on to grudges or hold on to things, and maybe just they struggle with unforgiveness in a sense.
It could be a California forest fire.
Yeah.
Like it could be the cigarette that just kind of like falls into the grass, and at first is like nothing, and then it starts to smolder, and then it just raging fire at that point. Now, so that's kind of our example.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite as destructive. That might be a little bit too far.
Yeah. Well, we're just saying upsetting things.
Yeah.
But the same thing happens to a positive stimuli as well. So they're just slower to react and highly contemplative, really.
Yeah.
One of the things too is, so we talked about the last two. In the last two, cholerics are reactive to they use their intellect and their will a lot. Sanguines react to their common sense power, meaning just externals. It's like a shiny object, squirrel, whatever. That's like the sanguine. The melancholic is highly influenced by their appetites and their emotions. So their sense emotions, possibly their rational appetite, which is the will as well. If they are like matured, right? And they are motivated by perfection or the ideal. So the descriptor of the melancholic is the perfect melancholic. If you struggle with perfectionism, or if you just really like things particularly, and like you're very you like things perfect, quite possibly you're a melancholic.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody about this the other day about being a parent and looking at your kids and trying to kind of guess what their temperament is, because these are natural dispositions. You can start to see these things in their immature state in their in your kids. And so we look at Avila, and like Avila, even when before she was even 2 years old, still sitting in the high chair, she hated having a messy face. She hated having messy on her hands. She would clean up her little tray. She liked to kind of put things in order. And so we started to kind of, this is very indicative of melancholic kind of perfection, very orderly.
Yes.
Disposition.
Well, you definitely want to reach out to a melancholic to maybe help you organize. This is where the sanguine and the melancholic would work really well together, because sanguines are very disorganized. Not saying that you can't grow in that discipline, but the melancholic just naturally likes order. And we've been using the characters from Winnie the Pooh. This is Eeyore. And if you know Eeyore, he's very focused on the sad things, right? So there is an inclination towards sadness for the melancholic. Matt, do you want to speak to that, or do you want to let's just get into the light side?
Yeah, let's talk light side of the melancholic.
Because Matt is choleric melancholic, so his dominant is choleric, and his secondary is melancholic.
And I used to really not like the melancholic, but I've kind of grown to appreciate it a lot more, because I used to think the caricature of Eeyore, the Debbie Downer, the wet blanket, as the melancholic. And I think in a very immature sense, sure, it could be that.
Yes.
When we give these Winnie the Pooh references, they're caricatures.
They're
right?
They're the raw sense.
Yeah, they're amplifying kind of the extreme dispositions of the temperaments. And so, there's an inclination towards kind of being pensive, being quiet, but that's also could be an inclination to being very contemplative and meditative, which are things that come, frankly, quite easy to the melancholics. I'm curious if people that are doing our journal, and they have this melancholic disposition, just feel very at ease, because there's a lot of contemplation, there's a lot of meditation and consideration that's going on interiorly in the journal.
I will add to that, actually, being a sanguine coach without a lick of melancholic in me. I've coached tons of melancholics. They're the people who come to get help, which is a beautiful quality for somebody, and they are on top of it. They will schedule all of their coaching sessions ahead of time, and boom, 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 they're right on time. So I appreciate coaching melancholics.
Yeah, they tend to be very aware, because they have that interior life that's fairly active and considering. Maybe they're high in the Clifton strengths, and maybe high intellection, right? Which is always just considering and looking at things from all different angles. So
the good things about the melancholic: they're thoughtful, they're spiritual, they're deep. In fact, one of the books I read on the temperaments, I forget what, I think it's called The Four Temperaments, by Reverend Houck, Houck. He said that the choleric and the melancholics are the most, the temperaments of the saints. Most saints have those two temperaments, primary temperaments. So they're deeply spiritual. They're usually very artistic or musical or just creative. Introverted, deeply compassionate. They're thinkers. They're usually very smart. They are goal oriented. They are detached from environment. They like to be alone. They abhor injustice. They can be idealistic in a good way, self-sacrificing, sensitive, pensive, reserved, philosophical, inclination towards reflection, makes decisions based on principles and ideas, and have a high tolerance for mortification.
Mm-hmm. I think of like the melancholic merging with a teaching charism could be almost like that philosophical professor, right?
Yes.
That just kind of questions things, turns things over, and just enjoys the discussion, enjoys the exploration. I think also like just if we were to open up my journal and then Aaron's journal and compare the two of them, mine has few words in it. There's a lot going on in my head. Aaron's is full, completely full. Like what's inside, extroverted, sanguine, choleric, needs to be out on the paper and expressed externally. Where melancholics, they're comfortable with an interior expression that doesn't necessarily have to make its way outward, right?
Yeah.
Now paired with an extroverted temperament like a choleric or a sanguine. Can melancholic sanguines that exist? Is that the one that?
There's
Questions
debate
on
because they're so different.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about this last time. I think they can coexist, like as a primary and secondary, a sanguine melancholic, and maybe they have reactions to certain stimuli that's different.
Okay.
So like maybe something that maybe they're more attached to, they can have a melancholic reaction.
Yeah, because it's hard to say that somebody's quick to react and slow to react.
Yeah.
In the same kind of disposition, so that's where a little bit of the controversy comes in. But, anyways, like pairing your melancholic with that extroverted other secondary could mean that you're very pensive, but then you also like to share that information. So I can see like a melancholic personality and a communication, somebody that's high in communication on Clifton Strengths can probably share very eloquently and very deeply something, versus somebody that may not necessarily have that deep melancholic, more of a sanguine that is very relatable, but maybe they don't necessarily go as deep as that melancholic mind. So I like being able to just go back and forth. Aaron makes everything fun. If I was the only one doing this podcast, it'd be probably a very boring podcast. We'd go some deep places, but it'd be kind of a boring podcast.
And I'm like, yeah, Tigger. You know? Boing.
So
very much a character.
Eeyore and Tigger here.
All right. So the dark side of melancholic tends towards sadness or sorrow for that sense appetite of sorrow, meaning the sense appetite of sorrow when you are experiencing sorrow in your body, it's because of the thought, some evil is upon me right now. So for a melancholic, they will kind of see and find the evidence of some evil being upon them. Not all the time. And like we say, we're speaking in generalizations, but their tendency towards that will be, I think of restorative as the Clifton strength. Just kind of like you want to find a problem to solve it, where you're looking for that in a sense. So you're looking for that evidence to support that narrative that there's some evil upon me right now, and if it's not, it's coming.
Yeah.
So
I think how Eeyore had a rain cloud that just kind of followed him around. And even the movie Inside Out.
Yes. Sorrow.
Yeah, the little Sorrow character, very melancholic. Oh well, very sad.
Yes. But I love that movie because I just think there's such a deep. It's obviously not philosophically correct, but it is. There's this one part where Joy, which would be the sanguine character, right, and Sorrow, which would be the melancholic. Joy keeps trying to keep these memories away from sadness or sorrow, and And then, but like sorrow for some reason keeps trying to touch them. So like they're just like these joyful memories. And finally, sorrow gets to touch one of them, and it just brings the whole thing to completion. It actually makes it super deep. Like the reason why this little girl is experiencing joy in this memory was because the sadness was overcome, right? And by joy. And it was usually overcome by, other people coming in and expressing love to her and all this stuff. So I just love that because it actually brings the fullest dimension to it. This is why we need everyone from these temperaments. So, dark side of melancholic, we're getting back to that, is motivated by problems, actually. Looks at the downside, can do that. And I kind of gave some of those examples. Black or white thinking, very little gray.
Can we pause that black or white thinking? Okay, because some of the melancholics may be listening and be like, yeah, that's awesome. It should be black. Like, there are things that are black and white. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things that are black and white. Sure, certainly.
Morally
speaking.
Certainly.
But there is just a tendency to want the simplicity of categorizing something. Because categorizing things is order, there's predictability. You can kind of create safety in an otherwise very risky environment. So black and white thinking has a way of kind of reducing risk in the mind of the melancholic. And at the same time, sometimes it's appropriate, but other times it is an obstacle, right? Because you fail to really consider nuances. That gray area can be a little bit frustrating, right? Because
it's not neat and tidy.
It's not neat and perfect. Melancholic likes to have, buckets for everything. And here we are, we got this gray area bucket. It's like, okay, where does it go?
Where the sanguine lives in gray. I remember I was talking to one of my friends who, I think she had like a touch of melancholic in her, and she's like, not everything is gray, Erin. And I was like, not everything's black and white. And like we would go back and forth. So anyway, okay. So some other things are, they can tend to have few friends, which could be a good, they're very selective about their friends. And they don't become friends with everyone because there's a particular around that.
Yeah, few friends, but deep friendships.
Yes.
Also, I think of the relator strength versus the woo strength, or the woo signature theme in Clifton.
Yep. They can be exclusive. They can second guess. They may not prioritize well. They tend to discouragement and self-pity. They can worry over possible misfortune. They can be a hypochondriac. They can be easily hurt. They can hold grudges. They can be slow and sometimes indecisive. They can be pessimistic, moody, critical, overly cautious, and perfectionistic.
Yeah.
Notice how I said it can be, right? Like we can grow in these areas too.
Where's my melancholic tripped you up before, Erin?
When you wander off.
Do a little Irish goodbye.
No. So that's probably more from your light side, where you're just you're introspective and you're thoughtful and spiritual, and you're just deep into thought, and you wander off, and I'm like, where is my husband?
Well, it's kind
happens all the time.
But also when we're at parties, I think of, and Lisa Canning calls me out for this when we're over at her house. She's another sanguine, and it's just everybody knows when Matt's ready to go. I get up, I start shifting around, and people laugh at it at that point. And here, my motivation is okay, I know that an extra 30 minutes at this party is going to be 30 minutes added to before we go to bed, which is going to disrupt my routine the next morning and possibly my daughter's routine. So all of these things, these collisions are happening, and my head is kind of I'm inside my own head, not very present at that moment.
Yes. So I would say that's where you're particular and even the overly cautious, being protective of your time in the morning, which is your solitary time. This is your introverted time.
Yeah, I realize that I really need to have that, and when I don't have that in the morning, it gets very disruptive. When I'm sitting down and I know I've slept in, right, and I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden, I'm just starting a rosary or starting a journal, and I hear that boom, 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 bump of like Avila's feet coming up the stairs.
You're like, no.
I'm just like, oh my gosh, my heart actually like, because I just know I'm losing that time. As much as I love my daughter, right? So, but those have been moments of growth for me. Anyways,
Yeah.
where to next, Erin?
Yeah. I think another area it shows up is just worrying for you. And it's just about certain things, not always, but just things that I don't ever think of. Not to say I don't worry, but like I just don't have that tendency to worry.
Yeah. My old roommate from college used to come up to me and like he would just go like this to my forehead.
He has
like,
this like upside down V, the worry V.
And it's just like the angled furrowed brow, he would call it.
And he
it's
would
just
just
like
go
when
like
I'm
this.
thinking, it'd be like smooth it out. It's like always you just go
Only
deep.
it was that easy.
Just go deep into thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure Nick was choleric sanguine.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
If
There's
I
a
could
lot-
guess it.
Yeah.
I have like this ability to just guess somebody's temperament, even just knowing them from like 10 minutes. I'm like, this is what you are. Like, am I right?
And then when she gets it wrong, she just forgets that ever happened.
I guess. I do get it wrong sometimes, but it's usually, I'm like, no, I think you took the test wrong. So
But the
you
melancholic
probably
doesn't
should
forget.
take it again.
The melancholic doesn't forget.
Yes, they do not forget. Okay, so natural virtues and vices. Natural virtues and spiritual gifts that the melancholic would have is piety, long suffering, which is like such a mystery to me. Wisdom, compassion, introspection, reflective, and have a natural inclination towards meditation and contemplation, justice, and temperance. All good things to have. Natural vices and spiritual weaknesses. There's a hesitancy. There's a, I'm going to say this word wrong, timidity. Did I say it right?
You said it really well. Yes. Good job.
Scrupulosity, judgmentalism, despair, perfectionism, pride, fearful, curt in speech. I want to pause here.
Self-righteousness.
Okay, yes.
Self-righteousness.
I like how you added that in there. But I want to pause here on perfectionism, because a lot of people might be like, okay, isn't it good to be driven by the ideal and perfection? Like, aren't we supposed to be trying to reach perfection?
Be perfect.
If you're a melancholic
As your
listening.
Heavenly Father is perfect.
Yes. That word perfect, and I know I've shared this in a bajillion other podcasts, but that word perfect, teleos, actually means to be complete. How do we complete ourselves? Not through our own power. We can't. Unfortunately, we are imperfect beings.
That's Pelagianism.
Yes, and we need God, our Creator, to come in and perfect us. This is where perfectionism goes wrong. When we actually think we are the ones to actually create our own perfection.
Yeah.
Like Matt was saying, that's Pelagianism.
It's demanding perfection from an imperfect tree, or perfect fruit from an imperfect tree. It is the law of, what is it? Law of insufficient reason.
Yes. Yes.
Violates that.
You just can't do it. So,
Yep.
And that can very quickly turn into pride and usurpation of God, which are sins. So that's why we kind of put in perfectionism as a spiritual weakness or a vice.
Yeah, the self-righteousness, I think that can tie back to the black and white thinking, right?
Like, I'm right.
Well, yeah, it's I'm right. I always think of like another one of my friends from college that like was in a little argument, and finally he just goes, "I'm right and I'm cooler," and we went, "Ah!" We just
Like,
laughed
yes.
at him for the next 20 years.
I'm going to say that from now on.
I'm right and I'm cooler.
I love it.
But yeah, that self-righteousness can show up because it's like, no, I've got this, and it can really turn into a beam and splinter exercise. And so we'll get into ways that the journal can help out, or just some practices to grow in some of these natural virtues that we're going to get into and overcome some of these vices. What do we got for virtues, Erin?
Virtues that you could pray for if you're a melancholic, surrender to God, like just that docility, to surrender to Him, and kind of like a release of that control or that perfectionism or that ideal. Joy, you can pray for joy. You can pray for charity, self-compassion. I love St. Francis de Sales has a ton on self-compassion, like a ton of writings on that, and just kind of like what is the use, I'm totally paraphrasing this, but like what is the use of focusing on your anxiety? It's just going to cause more anxiety. What is the use of focusing on your sadness? It's going to cause more sadness. So on and on. There's a great quote by him on that.
And we even have one of our podcasts with Dr. Kevin Boast. It was like the Catholic's Guide to Loneliness, and he talks about like how the greatest thing that you could do to overcome loneliness is change the way that you're thinking about your circumstances, really challenge some of those things. And that's where the melancholic can get stuck in its own rinse cycle and its own ruminations, and kind of turn a small problem into something very big.
Yes. Mountain into a molehill.
Yeah. Molehill into a mountain. Yes.
Yes. Yes. That's right. They could pray for humility.
It's a double-edged coin.
Oh my gosh. I get those things mixed up all of the time. We could do a whole podcast on that.
Count your lucky stars.
It makes sense in my head. So they could pray for humility. They could pray for fortitude, prudence, magnanimity.
Magnanimity.
I said it right.
Cool. You did do well.
Melancholic saints: Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross, and Saint John of the Cross. Mm-hmm. Those are melancholic saints.
Yeah, think of Saint John of the Cross. He's the one that gave us the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. And so, very much, I'm studying him quite a bit in my spiritual direction certification over at Divine Mercy University. He is one of the doctors of the church, and he was a guy that even in his own order, he was really persecuted within his own order, and he spent a lot of time in isolation because of that. But in that isolation, we can see this virtuous mind of his was constantly ruminating.
But he probably also loved it.
On like, right, but there's kind of a natural, natural. Yeah, he would just
likes to be alone.
Cooler, put him in the cooler.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's interesting is knowing these doctors of the church, these saints of the church, with these particular temperaments. You see it come out in their writing, so it's really helpful to know what their temperament is going into it, and just kind of like watch. Oh, okay, this is from a perspective of somebody who has that natural disposition towards melancholy. So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I find it interesting the way that St. John of the Cross talks about consolations also. He's just kind of like, yeah, no big deal, just let him go. Let him go. Like, don't like put too much stock in those things, or don't put too much stock in kind of even personal private revelation. Don't get caught up in like the emotional piece. It's like very sober, just stay sober.
Yeah, says the person who has no problem with long suffering or mortification. Must be nice. Yeah. So, okay, leaning into your strengths. You have this ability to like look below the surface and see and contemplate great depth. So when you're in a relationship with somebody, or maybe you're a coach, or maybe you're getting coached, but you really have this ability to go deep. That is like so opposite of the sanguine. The sanguine really needs to kind of like focus to go deep on things.
Yeah, when I'm coaching a melancholic, I tend to find it easy to talk a lot less, because they can kind of just, you jumpstart the reason cycle, and that like rumination on something gooder, something better, or another way, like starts to really build momentum, that slow build, where you can see where like this slow build can be directed towards something very life-giving as well.
Yeah. I like this one, and this is actually where I see this show up in you a lot. But one of your strengths is everything you do has purpose and likely a process. So if not yet, if you don't have a process yet, you're certainly working on it. But because of this, like, let's just say you're a melancholic mom, you probably run a tight ship at home, you know, in the home. Or if you are just melancholic at your job, that's one of the things that you can tend to do is create a process. You're probably not great in roles that do not have processes, that have a lot of variety and a lot of questions coming in, or a lot of
chaos.
A lot of chaos, yeah. You don't like that.
I think if the melancholic is a very stabilizing force on a team as well. And even as you were sharing some of those things, processes, I think of Clifton Strength's discipline as being one of those. Discipline hates chaos, wants to eradicate chaos, because chaos does not allow it to get a predictable result that it's looking for. And so processes help get us predictable results, and they help us reduce risk at that point, and no risk or mitigate risk as well. So I hear even consistency is one of those Clifton strengths showing up here in the Melancholic.
Yeah. I love this quote by Aristotle where he says, all men of genius are of melancholy temperament. So there's a very likely chance that you are smart, you're brilliant, and you have a lot of ability to focus your mental energy. Just notice what you're focusing on, because like you can be focusing on all the areas that you've been hurt and what everybody else should be doing differently, and just focus on areas of growth. So like having that ability of focus, or that Clifton strength of focus, to like really put all of your mental energy into something, make sure you're directing it well.
Yeah, I wonder, as we're like talking through this, I wonder if like the current education system was like driven by melancholics. Like it
Yes.
seems to almost where
A lot of
you, the
teachers I know
sanguine-
are melancholic too, which is interesting.
Yeah, but like they're teaching, but then they're also the ones that are like creating the environments that they know their melancholic temperament would thrive in. You know, sitting during, I can listen to a lecture and be perfectly happy, just sitting there, listening, taking notes. I'm engaged. Erin, how do you do with lectures?
It's awful. I probably fall asleep. And you know, I used to have all of my notebooks in school. Used to have like doodles, but like also doodles with like trails, because I was falling asleep even while I was doodling. It's just like loads of notebooks without like cohesive notes, but like doodles with tails.
But you had lots of friends.
So many friends. We found all these journals that my mom wrote to all of us. I mean, like 5 kids. She would just write us, she'd put a picture in and write us a little letter, and it was like from like the 90s, so I was like super young. And one of the things she just kept saying, like, you'll do better in school, like very encouraging with school. Just like not a very a natural talent of mine to listen, obviously. But she's like, but you know what? You have a lot of friends, and that's always going to be like, you just make friends wherever you go. And so, yeah, it was just like, those were always the encouraging moments. Like, don't worry, you'll do better. You'll turn those C's into A's, but you got a lot of friends.
Yeah, melancholic likes the structure, likes the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's another thing you can do to lean in. So since you are driven by high standards and driven by perfection, I already kind of spoke to this, but make sure that you do not make yourself the source of that perfection, but God. And make sure that that focus is on becoming holier and growing in virtue, and even growing in charity, and some of those virtues that we said to pray about. Focus your energy on those things.
Yeah, melancholic needs to get out of their own head. I think that there needs to be a structure in life to get out of your own head, and part of that structure actually could be getting a coach. So there's a virtue called good counsel, right? That I think could also be something very helpful for the melancholic, because you can get stuck in your own little world and be totally content in there, and it may not necessarily be imbued with a whole lot of truth. And so having somebody that can hold the mirror up and just insert a little bit more perspective into that world is something that will balance the melancholic out very well.
Yeah. You want to do some helpful journal exercises?
Yeah.
So if you don't have our journal, we have a free downloadable version on our website, and you could just try these out. If you are of the melancholic tendency or disposition or temperament, exercise 1 would be really great for you. Those are the successes. So often melancholics love a to-do list and like things that still need to be done throughout the day. They like checking things off, getting things done. Successes are reflecting on the day before. So saying like, what were my successes yesterday? What worked yesterday? And this is really countering that Eeyore mentality, like, nothing's gonna get better.
I have so far to go.
Yeah. So what we want you guys to do is just like really focus on what the successes from yesterday. So just answering questions like, what worked yesterday? Where did I see God's goodness yesterday? Where did God's grace show up? How did I lean on God more, but like with him perfecting me? There's just like all different ways that you can find success. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I think of Dan Sullivan, Gap in the Gain, always measure backwards, right? Always measure success backwards. We got a podcast called Baptizing the Gap in the Gain.
It's a good one.
I think that's a good one for the melancholic. Focuses your attention on the incremental growth that you've made over time. And that's a better place to be for the long game.
For sure. Exercise 2, gratitude's another thing. Like, remember, our minds, we can direct where our minds go. So if a melancholic has a tendency towards sadness, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Now, you certainly want a melancholic coming in and maybe on a team and maybe thinking, okay, this might be a landmine over here, and this might, if it's effective, if it helps you become more productive as a team, it's a great way to use.
It can show up as a strength.
Yes, that deliberation and that restorative effort. But if you're hyper focusing on all the things that are going to happen wrong, like really direct your mind to the things that you're grateful for. What was it, like fear and gratitude cannot exist?
They don't coexist in the mind.
In the mind at the same time. So when you are being grateful, like really authentically grateful for things, you can't be afraid of that evil that's upon you.
And the evil that's upon you is just like, okay, what I think what gratitude does is it puts us, we recognize in a place of gratitude that we've received something from a giver. Well, that implies that there is a giver. That giver is God. And now if we're aware that we're receiving something from God and that God is present to us, it can really transform some of those ruminations. It's hard to feel lonely or hard to believe that you're never going to get better when God is right there, right? And you can see all this evidence. You've just gone through the exercises, gratitude, to find evidence for God's presence in your life. And so growing activities that can grow your awareness of God's presence, I think is a very helpful thing for the melancholic.
Yes, great. When you're talking, I was just thinking about the 4 cardinal virtues. Maybe we'll talk about that in the next one. Okay, anyway. Exercise 3. Because you are goal-oriented naturally, you might ruminate, you might be like, is this the right goal, so on and so forth. So we want you to kind of focus, like really be able to see your goal in your imagination and just kind of picture it with the Lord. Use that like power of contemplation that you have and picture it with the Lord and then surrender it to him. That's going to be challenging for you, that surrendering. That I don't know where this comes up for you.
No, it's not so much the surrendering piece. It's what can be challenging is moving it from a place of abstract goal or ideal to something that's a little bit more concrete. Because as soon as we go from abstract to concrete, we lose a little bit of perfection, arguably. But if our goals only exist in the abstract, then they're only going to exist in our mind. And we are meant to make visible the invisible reality of the Lord. So
so like maybe just getting somebody into action.
Yeah, well, getting concrete. I think, like you said, use the power of your imagination for good to really be able to picture what achievement in this goal looks like. And otherwise, you're going to sit in this ideal land, and you're always going to be like, I'm not there yet, because it's an ideal. You're not meant to arrive at an ideal. That's just a direction. But the goal is something that is the building on the horizon. You're never going to meet the horizon, but if you keep walking towards the building, eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, I think some motivating sayings for the melancholic is, the Lord is the lamp unto my feet. Just towards the tendency to worry, like, oh, what if I make the wrong decision? Or and that's really where they're indecisive. It's not indecisive like the phlegmatic, which we'll get into that next podcast, but indecisive, we're thinking there is a right decision and there's a wrong decision, really being in that black or white thinking. So thinking that thought, the Lord is a lamp unto my feet, he's here with me right now, I can take this step, this one step towards where I think he's calling me, and then I can always reassess. Action brings clarity. I think that was really helpful for you as the melancholic, just to kind of solidify, like making that ideal concrete. And then progress over perfection.
Yeah,
Love that one.
Not just action brings clarity, but imperfect action brings clarity.
Yes.
Don't wait for
that
perfection.
might trigger some melancholics.
But I found it very helpful for me because I realized how true it was. It was when I was waiting for the perfect next step to take and the perfect clarity. First of all, there's that's that desire towards certainty and predictability. But when we have predictability and we have certainty, then we have no room for faith. And so this is where the melancholic can grow in that disposition towards faith, which you're releasing a little bit of control there, and you are taking a step that may introduce a little bit of chaos, right? But that's where we lean on the faith. And so these exercises, not huge, massive steps, but like little steps at a time.
Yeah.
To still be able to control the chaos. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to quit my job and I'm going to start this thing that I've never done before. It's like, that's introducing a whole lot of chaos.
I think you're bringing up a good point. So when we are like effectively trying to help the temperaments move from their natural inclination, maybe like their natural fallen inclinations, we tend to think, oh, let's go opposite extreme. I don't know. Like I think of like quitting smoking when I used to smoke. Going cold turkey never worked for me. Like it was like the complete opposite extreme. Some people it might work for them, but like I think just baby steps with this stuff and being like, what if today I make the most perfect decision that I know I can make through prayer? So I think that's kind of like the baby steps. Like, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but like today I'm going to make the most complete decision that I have received in prayer, and I'm going to do that. So it's a little baby step. Every other exercise in the journal is very natural for you, going deep, going interior. We have tons of stuff in our academy that all of you melancholics would love. If you're not a part of it, highly recommend it. Again, we're going to be actually, like, the focus of July is going to be the temperaments.
Yeah.
So we have coaches here. Like, if this is something that you're like, I want to learn more, I want to learn how to challenge these areas that I'm kind of naturally inclined towards, or lean into my strengths more, that's what we're going to be focusing on. The 4 different temperaments and how to help you guys. Also, we have not talked about this at all in these podcasts, but like how melancholics or your temperament shows up in relationships, or how to, if you're a sanguine, and how do you talk to a melancholic? How do you really kind of engage them, or like just those are like the dynamics that we're going to also be talking about, which I'm excited.
Yeah, and this is something that a lesson that we also have in our course, Catholic Coaching Foundations.
Yes.
It's actually a fairly new release, but we've taken all the content from our Purgative Way coach training program, and we've made that available in a self-paced course. There's a whole lesson that's dedicated to coaching in the temperaments, being aware of your own temperaments and how you show up, and where you might be showing up in a way that frustrates growth in your client, but also being aware of your client's temperament and how to navigate that and show it best to support them in their growth. So, and that's the one that like everybody says for the most part.
They love that one.
That's their favorite one.
Yeah.
It's just super practical and helpful.
Whether you're a coach or not, if you just want to like improve your marriage or improve your relationships, like it's a great lesson for that. Yeah. So come join us in the academy, guys. That's all we have for you today on the melancholic temperament. Join us next week. We're going to be talking about phlegmatic. That's Winnie the Pooh. And so we're going to be diving into that one. And yeah. And if you guys aren't in the academy, come check it out just for a month, Lots
of fun.
Yeah, so fun.
Get coached.
Definitely check it out.
20-minute calls.
The month of the temperament. This really appealed to you. Come check it out. All right. See you guys next week.
See you next week. Bye.